Garry Kasparov is a legend, but strangely most players don't know his actual chess advice. I've studied his books and games for years, I've met him personally, and here are the 9 main rules distilled from decades of his chess dominance. We'll learn all the 9 rules through one of his legendary battles against his greatest rival, Anatoly Karpov. Garry's white here, Karpov is black, and we've got the Queen's Gambit. So far it's all standard. Garry trades on d5, goes bishop f4, developing a bishop, pawn to c6, and now queen to c2. And let's begin right here. Here's the first tip from Garry. Never play an opening move you don't understand. Now, and it's kind of interesting because he's known for his very deep opening preparation, knowing a lot, analyzing a ton of stuff with computers. But he still tells you, do not play a move based on memorization, or based on theory, or based on some other GM played whatever, right? He says, only play a move if you yourself understand it. That's why it's so critical, right? So here, why did white play the move queen to c2? What do you think? If you don't know the idea, you might think that, oh, he develops the queen or whatever. But the real goal is to prevent black from developing his light square bishop to an active position. And now, since your queen controls that square, for black it's much harder to find an active square for his light square bishop. Black goes bishop d6, offering an exchange. White trades, pawn to e3. So far, both sides developed. Knight e7. Once again, black is ready to bring the bishop out to f5 to this active position, and Garry immediately shuts it down with his own battery. Bishop d3, controlling this square f5 so that black still cannot find a good square for his bishop. Plus, on top of that, white is also putting out this battery, making it harder for black to castle there. By the way, white certainly does not want to take this pawn right away. That would be a big blunder. Pawn to g6 loses a bishop, even though once Fischer in his game against Spassky kind of blundered the bishop like that. But of course, that's not the way to go. So here, knight to e2. So far, both sides just developed their pieces. Pawn to h6. Black can't castle right away because then bishop takes h7 would indeed be an issue. So he first plays pawn to h6, and now both sides castle. All right, here's another interesting moment. You've developed your pieces, you castled, now what? And here's the recipe from Garry. He says that you cannot attack right away. Think about this. You'd wish to maybe jump there and attack his queen, but you can't because of his pawn. Or maybe you'd wish to jump here and attack his queen, but again, you cannot because of his pawn. You cannot engage your rooks or queen into play because, again, the whole thing is barricaded with pawns. And therefore, the first thing you need is to open up the position. And the rule is you can't attack through a closed door, open the position first. And there are 2 ways of doing that, and the first and the most standard way is using pawn breaks. He goes pawn to a3, getting ready to start expanding on the queen side and maybe opening the position right there. Karpov shuts it down with pawn to a5. And by the way, these two are just so intense rivals. I know one guy who worked with Karpov, and that guy once asked in a private conversation, Karpov, what does he think about Kasparov? And Karpov just got angry and didn't even want to talk about Garry. That's how much he hates the guy because of their so intensive rivalry over decades. Anyways, back to the game. Here's another very interesting position. Now, you want to attack, but there is kind of no easy way. What do you want to do now? And here's the next rule from Garry. Do not attack until every piece is ready. Kasparov highlights that premature attacks are one of the biggest issues in chess because we're eager to launch an attack as soon as we see an opportunity, which oftentimes weakens your own position, and then you can even mess up and lose the game. So Kasparov doesn't want that. He plays rook to d1, bringing his last piece into the game, and only then ready to launch his attack. By the way, he kind of reminds me of sort of a more sophisticated version of Tal, right? Because Garry was also a very aggressive attacking player, but unlike Tal, who often were a little bit burning bridges and playing too risky, Kasparov was very sophisticated and very well prepared. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. Pawn to b6 by Karpov, getting ready to develop his bishop one way or the other. And now pawn to e4, another pawn break by Garry. Again, you can't attack through a closed door, you gotta open up the position. So e4 puts the pressure right here. Now after an exchange, knight takes e4, makes a very little but still a threat. Knight takes d6. I mean, I'm saying little not because capturing a queen is something small, just because it can be easily avoided by black, and certainly black did. He played queen to b8, putting the queen all the way back to safety. But nevertheless, that also brings us to the next rule of Garry Kasparov. And this rule was summarized by Carlsen, who was also coached by Garry. And while sharing his reflections on Garry Kasparov and what he learned from him, Carlsen said that idea that if you make 10 threats in a row, your opponent will blunder eventually.
And according to Garry, if you make 10 threats in a row, your opponent is going to blunder eventually.
And this is like his biggest takeaway from working with Garry Kasparov. And so Kasparov was big on making constant threats, keeping pressure onto your opponent. And this relentless pressure is something that really broke his opponents. By the way, speaking about these two players, we now are obsessed with Magnus Carlsen, understandably, but Garry Kasparov has been the #1 player for 21 years, while for Carlsen, he's been on top for 16 years. And therefore, as of now, we're yet to find out whether Carlsen will ever match Garry Kasparov's record. Anyways, let's come back to the position. It is white to play. What do you do here? Here's a quote from Garry himself. If you don't see an immediate win, an immediate breakthrough, just make a few quiet moves. Let your opponent play. Give them a chance to weaken their position. Basically what he says is, if you don't see an immediate opportunity to attack to break through, then just improve your position a little bit and also wait. Very often your opponent himself will do something silly or something that will expose his position and will give you new attacking opportunities. In this position, Garry just moves the knight right here to c3, improving the position of the knight and also waiting. Karpov goes bishop a6 because he wants to develop his final minor piece. And now, here's an interesting part. This move certainly makes sense for Black. Black do want to, develop their minor piece. However, as a result of this exchange, there are a couple things that change not in the favor of Black. One of them is this rook on a6 is a little bit awkward and exposed. And secondly, since this bishop on d3 was traded off, this also opened up this d-file for Garry's rook. And now he can push in the center and break open the position. So interestingly, this opportunity wasn't there just a move ago because that bishop on d3 was obstructing the way. But now, just like Garry advertised, when you wait, your opponent himself will give you new attacking opportunities. And now he seizes an opportunity to go forward in the center, again making a pawn break to open up the position. After this trade in the middle of the board, rook takes d5, another little threat by Garry. Again, this is literally his trademark style. Can't keep creating that little threats all over again and again. They break your opponent slowly but surely because even though, he will potentially notice and defend against 9 threats out of 10, but then eventually that final threat will break him. Or in Garry's own words, I like to say that the attacker always has the advantage. Anyways, Black goes rook to a7, protecting the knight this way and also bringing the rook back into play. Black is hoping maybe to play rook to c7. And now he played a move that I probably would not even consider. So I would probably play just rook to d1, doubling down on this knight, and, probably I wouldn't even think about it twice. But Garry plays queen to d2, and that's why he's the legend and I'm not. The move, again, that looks not as obvious at first, but there are a couple ideas behind that. First off, he not only attacks the knight, but he also gets his queen out of danger along the c-file, because Black was about to bring one of his rooks right there. And there's also one more hidden idea, which we will see within a couple moves. So right now, this knight on d7 is hanging, and Black is having a little bit of a hard time protecting it, because ideally Black would love to move it here, but right now he can't, because White knight would capture that and ruin Black's pawn structure. Protecting it with the rook is also not an option because now the rook will be pinned, the knight will be pinned, I should say, and White will be able to double down and probably win this knight eventually. That's also not good. Karpov played knight to c5, kind of trying to seduce Garry to trade off on c5 and to win a pawn, and that would definitely be an opportunity. So here, White could take on c5, which he didn't, and then after Black recaptures, rook takes c5. Looks pretty good for White at first, because White wins a pawn, this other pawn on a5 is a little bit hanging, and that would be an opportunity for White, but not the best move. And besides the chess thing, there is also this interesting, I think, the psychological thing. A little bit earlier, I've told you that Kasparov was kind of the 2.0 version of Mikhail Tal, because Tal, as much as we love him for his creative style and beautiful combinations, he was a little bit one-sided anyways, right? And back in the day, my coach, Malnuk, who also played a couple of games against Tal, told me that there was this internal joke that being down a pawn against Tal in an endgame is a draw, kind of digging into Tal's inability to play endgames brilliantly, because he was primarily the master of attack. And for Kasparov, it's not as much of a problem. He was much more universal, but nevertheless, his core skill was attack, not endgames. And here, he found another beautiful idea. Instead of trading on c5, he sacrificed his knight on f6. That probably came out as a shocker for Karpov, because the knight is just sacrificed seemingly for nothing, just to open the black king. And this goes back to the previous idea we talked about, that there are just two ways to open up the position when you want to attack. One of them is pawn breaks, and the second thing is to sacrifice a piece. In the game, black accepted the knight sacrifice because otherwise, if king goes to h8, white will continue attacking. And here's one more brilliant gold nugget of wisdom from Garry. If your opponent's pieces are clustered on one side, shift the focus to where they're absent. So here Garry would play rook to h5, another great move, and now just look at the position. There's another beautiful technique that I learned from Garry. He says, imagine that you divided in your imagination the board in two halves, the left half and the right half, and just notice where his pieces are. Like here you can see that black has most of his pieces on the queen side, while on the king side he's got basically nothing, right? There's this rook, but it does nothing anyways, right? And so on the king side, literally you've got three attackers, this queen, this rook, and the knight, against a lonely king, which already indicates that, yes, your attack should be easily successful, and you can go ahead and sacrifice material. It will probably work out. So for instance, after black plays whatever, I don't know, rook d8, you sacrifice the rook right here. Again, you have so many pieces right there that it's very easy to put together a checkmate. Back to the game, Karpov accepted the knight sacrifice, Kasparov captures on h6. Now the plan is pretty straightforward, rook h5 and then queen h8 checkmate. Looks like it's just over, but not yet. Black plays pawn to f5. And how would he play here as white? The majority of players would probably, almost unthinkingly, just capture this pawn f5 and think, okay, on the next turn, I'm gonna checkmate him pretty easily, one way or the other. And this move would be a terrible blunder, because now black can play pawn f6. This is exactly what Karpov has planned, and his rook from a7 somehow is now taking this crucial role in protecting of his king. And now if you play rook h5, like so what, he can bring this rook into the defense. Black is perfectly coordinated, he's up a knight still, and now probably black is winning. And here's what Kasparov said about this. Fantasy must be backed up by sober evaluation and calculation, or you spend your life making beautiful blunders. It looks like Garry knew something about us. And it's a pretty funny idea, because very often what it means is, if you see a great idea and you're excited about it, it could be a terrible blunder, because we tend to fall for that tunnel vision. When you get excited about something and you just execute it, you're hoping for it to work out, but you totally forget, considering your opponent and some other things, and you can easily mess up. So here Kasparov plays queen g5 first, checking the king. Karpov goes king to h8, now queen f6, one more in between check. And notice what Kasparov did right here. With the queen on f6, he blocked the f pawn, and now as he captures and threatens rook to g5, black cannot push this pawn forward and engage his rook into the defense. So now we clearly outnumber black, again that local superiority, and now rook g5 is a real issue, or maybe rook to h5. Again, looks like it's all over, but still Karpov finds the way to fight back. Knight to e4. It's always a pleasure to see a game between these two. Again, both are great players. Somehow black is still holding. The queen is attacked, rook to g5 is no longer an option, and Garry goes queen to h4. Now, queen h4 is another move with a threat, which is another beautiful thing. Notice that initially something like queen h6 could seem like a more tempting option, keeping the queen closer. However, the downside is that it is not a forcing move, right? And instead, Garry goes queen h4, which also hits the knight. And again, he really loved attacking all the time. And here's another great saying by Garry: I used to attack because it was the only thing I knew. Now I attack because I know it works. Now, queen h4, hitting the knight. Karpov goes rook e8, protecting the knight and bringing the rook into play. Rook to h5 by Kasparov, making a threat of rook to h8, checkmate. And another thing that surprised me in this game a little bit is that initially, a couple moves earlier, when Kasparov has just sacrificed his knight, I thought, okay, he's winning the game, he probably figured it all out, right? But now I realize that there are so many moves ahead, after this combo, that clearly he could not calculate it all. And even here, Karpov played f5, still bringing this rook into play. And the idea is, you cannot calculate it all. And what Kasparov says about this, which is one more tip, is evaluation trumps calculation. Yes, you need to calculate variations if you can, but at the end of the day, you cannot calculate everything. And it's really cool to hear that from Kasparov. from a legendary grandmaster, because we just assume that he can calculate and visualize, 10 moves ahead and he knows everything up front. He says it's not the case. He's still human. He cannot know it all. He just relies on those principles. He knows that he's got this local superiority with two pieces attacking this single king, and he trusts that there should be a checkmate down the line. So in this case, for instance, white goes rook h8, checking the king. It comes forward, queen h7. By the way, Karpov just resigned, or lost in time, not sure, probably resigned, because here queen h6 is pretty straightforward. White just keeps checking, and now if the king comes back, that's going to be rook to h7. It'll probably lead to a quick checkmate. And if the king comes forward, there are different ways. The most elegant one is rook to d1, which brings us to the final rule of Garry Kasparov: humiliate Karpov whenever possible. Just kidding, of course, even though, who knows, maybe he really thought like that. But his real final tip is your own games are your best study material. He highlighted many times that the habit of always analyzing his games and learning from them is that main habit that helped him to keep improving throughout his chess career. That said, I understand that while all these tips are very interesting and useful, on the other hand, they make it seem even more complicated. So what do you do about that? Well, I think it's actually much easier in reality, because I've analyzed hundreds, probably thousands of games of students, and I can tell you that there are just a few common roadblocks that prevent people from unlocking the next level. Like blunders is one of them. And therefore, I've put together a special bundle that gives you everything that you need to unlock that next level in chess and to give you the clear blueprint to follow. If you're interested, I'll link it down below, and have a great rest of the day. I'll talk to you in my next videos.